Welcome WEB21. We've got a fun one today again. This is going to be building on yesterday's components patterns where we just used a function, still builds a component like the other class techniques, but again, less craziness. The one new thing that we're going to be doing today is one of the most exciting things that you can do as a developer. Talk to other servers. We're making requests to APIs. And it's going to involve async code, promises, some really cool concepts, and maybe a little crazy concepts we're going to learn about. But it is one of the most interesting and high leverage things you're going to do as a developer. You get to basically, when you're using a third-party API on a server, there could have been like 100 PhD researchers developing this advanced artificial intelligence service. It's just as easy to access that as it is to access, say, a cat API. So that's the crazy thing, that you can leverage all this work that other people have done, oftentimes for free. Like you can get free credits for Amazon services, Google services, and tons of other third-party services. You can leverage these for free and mix and match them in really creative ways. So, and to the point where it almost feels like cheating. You can, put all these apps together and you didn't really feel like you made something new, but really you did. And you can build something that combines object detection, like photo recognition, that can tell you what, or it can tell you the, like scan social media and look for sentiment in words. Like all kinds of things are possible. And there's a really popular list of APIs, by the way. Let's start by, let me get my screen going here. There's a really popular list of APIs called Awesome APIs by Todd Motto. And if one of the PMs or FPLs can put that in Slack, I'd really appreciate it. I have to do my screen share twice for some reason. Zoom released a bug. Let me see, try one more time. Did that work? Okay. Second time's a charm here. Okay. So the idea is when you're building your components, some of them are going to need to talk to servers. You're going to need to take that third-party data and download some, maybe it's a dog API service or a cat API, which aren't they all cat APIs? Not really. So anyway, let's look at our objectives and get this lecture going. So our first objective is to understand and utilize asynchronous JavaScript and promises. And the next one, understand HTTP requests and get data from a server using Axios. And iterate over a list of data received from a server, creating a set of components, adding them to the DOM. So what we're basically going to do is take the patterns we used from previous lecture or from the last lecture and build on that. And it's all going to be around our, we're going to leverage async code and promises. So first steps first, we got to figure out what we're talking about. Like this async stuff and promises are probably new to everyone here. So let's talk about excuse me. So let's talk about how JavaScript is asynchronous. Now, what does async mean? I'm not talking about like async like that you wash your hands in, like async. Oh, puns galore. I'll try to contain myself. What is async? Let me get a thread going. What is Let me get that on screen here. So yeah, things happening at the same time. Also, if they're happening at the same time, they are one of the, that is true, but one of the things that's important is also that they could happen out of order. So suddenly the assumption that you make about your code that one command happens and the next command happens on your in your file, that is flipped on its head. So you can't make that assumption. So let's dive deeper into that and kind of prove or show what I'm talking about. Excellent. And Mimi, thank you. And again, like yesterday, like I said, definitely mention if you don't know what I'm talking about here. This is really important for me to get a sense of where everyone's at. So thank you for throwing some answers in here. So let's get started here. Actually, before we jump into the guided project, let me kick open a replit because I want to just look at this in isolation. Is there some feedback? Let me fix my audio. How about now?
Yeah, it's good.
Better? Okay. Cool. So let's go and get to create a new REPL here. I'll share the link out in 2 seconds. So the reason I want to do this is just to get something a little more focused and simpler here. Okay, so WEB21. Okay, so here I'm putting that in the WEB21 chat right now. Okay, so I just want to look at how promises work. And you saw some examples with set timeout. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create 2 function calls that will run out of order. So we can kind of see how this is how some of the weirdness comes out. So and set timeout is used really as kind of a placeholder to show that anything that's like a network call, making requests to API servers, may take an unknown amount of time. And it's used kind of as like a logical placeholder for that server request so that you can kind of focus on just what happens when you're doing async stuff without actually thinking about a third-party server. So pretend this is a server request. And if that doesn't make sense, just bear with me. It'll make sense shortly when we do actually start making requests to a real server. Sometimes this example doesn't make sense without the full context, but so I just want to print out my function name. And we're going to have 2. So if I go down here and say fn1, fn2, fn3, which order are those going to execute in? Think about it. Let me get a question thread going. Exactly. Sorry, I was slow on the thread there. Exactly. So this is kind of a weird little deceptive thing where you see 3, 2, 1, but it executes as 1, 2, 3. So this is proving that, well, showing maybe one of the more frustrating things about JavaScript, that things can kind of be flipped. And it is a, just when you're starting to figure it out, like I know some people feel like, table flip emoji. Like, I was just figuring this out, now you tell me things can be out of order? Yeah. So the function call, what async means in JavaScript is when you make a call, like set timeout is the actual thing that schedules the request. And what I mean by schedules is there's this callback queue. And when you hear that in Node, there is there's essentially a side queue in the background there that's handling requests that are handled out of bounds. Now, I know that's some jargon, and so set timeout is just known as one of the things that is async. So there are a couple other things that are just baked into the language, like fetch, that people know as async requests. We'll get into in a sec how you know you're dealing with an async thing, but for now, set timeouts are the placeholders for our server requests. So now we can see that things can be out of order here. That's cool and all, but we're still not dealing with promises. So what is a promise anyway? Like why do we care about promises, and what do they enable? I guess if I ask what's a promise, I'm just gonna get trolled, but so throw me some answers in that thread. So promises are really an area where I feel there's a lot of documentation online that's kind of wrong, and it goes through a lot of ceremony to get to the point. Like, this is a really hard area to understand, and promises can be boiled down pretty simply. So let me pull that up on screen here. Excellent. I love seeing all these answers, because this is a reflection of the variety of things you'll see online that are, I love it. This is great. When everyone has the same answer, it just means like you memorized the thing. But here it means that you've all learned different pieces, and you've all done some braining on this, and it's okay. So I see some people aren't sure, no idea. That's okay. We will get there. So we're talking about an eventual value. What the hell is an eventual value? Well, if something's an eventual value, that means that you can't rely on seeing the result or console logging the result like you might a regular old variable. A plus for Stranger Things reference there. Okay, so let me comment this out. Okay, so JS can be out of order. You may be thinking my JS is always out of order. Okay. So right here, we want to do a request to, actually, let's switch into our guided project. Let's start moving along in here, because we're going to actually build with the dogs API. I heard your feedback, and despite my cat and I, we had a discussion, and she said it's okay. But we're going to be using our dog API. So I want to start building this and actually show you what it looks like to get at these eventual values. Well, Thanks, Darian. Yeah, promises are something I've written a lot about. I've been reading and researching on them writing on them for like 5 or 6 years. So this is actually a subject that I've explored from many different angles, and I'm really excited to dig deeper on. So this is the API we're going to use, and we're also going to use a library called Axios. So not that one, that one. Hey, browser, why are you doing this? Okay, so Axios is a library that lets you make server requests in JavaScript. What we can do is, or what we need to do is use it like this. It's saying that we can make GET requests to a server. We just need to put a URL in here. Let me model how some of this fits together, and then we'll break it apart and pull out the pieces of it. So we need this Axios bit here because we haven't got to Yarn or any of that stuff. So we're going to use a CDN approach to import Axios into our guided project. Because it's on CodePen, we need to go into the settings here and put it under our HTML tab right here. So make sure, if you're following along, make sure you do this because we need this Axios bit right here. So let's save and close there. So right here, we know we're going to be using this docs API. We know we're going to be using this Axios thing. And what I want to do is, there's an example somewhere here. So there's a lot of details in here that are distracting. And when you're just trying to get started making async requests or trying to figure out what promises are, this can be daunting and really overwhelming. But there's only a couple key points you really need to know. So I'm going to kind of extract the stuff that you need out of here, just because I've memorized it. And then we'll go back and I'll show you the important bits you need. So when you're looking to use an API, you need to figure out what the URL is, or what the endpoint is, what it's called. So we need to get the endpoint for the service, dog API. So the way you do that is you often have to go to their documentation, and what you'll see is something that roughly looks like this. Here's that keyword endpoints, and if you go through here, you can see there's an endpoint to list all breeds. You can get a random image. You can also get images by breed or subbreed. But what we want to do is do this by breed, because here's the list. Let's pick a breed. Let's pick a Basenji. Those are spunky animals. Okay, they've got it hard-coded with a hound in there. So what we're seeing is an example of the endpoint URL and what we can expect to get down as the data, the shape of the data, the JSON, JavaScript object notation. Thanks, Christina. Christina shared the link to this API here. So what we want is this list of images, and then we want to turn that list of images into a bunch of cards that show up on the page. We want an API that looks like, get this switched over on my screen here. So ultimately, we want to build something that looks like this. Okay, so this is where we're heading. Okay, yay, Huskies. Okay, so let's just make sure this endpoint works, because if we're we need data from a server. We expect it to be in JSON, but let's make sure this URL works. So I want to take that image or that URL, and cool. So it looks like, in fact, that is giving me images, and it even gives me 1,000 images. It's quite a lot, but that looks valid. We're going to take that and take this URL into our project. There we go. Tanya, you want some Yorkies in here? Okay, I can make sure that still works. Oh, I guess they're a little touchy on that. You got to pick one out of the list. Oh yeah, Yorkshire Terriers. Duh. Okay. Okay, there we go. This is important. We got to get the right kind there. Okay, well, we'll just put terriers. Go back to our project here and paste that. So now that we've got Axios in here, let's just how do you get data from a server, and how do you get the data out of a promise? Now, I know we're still figuring out what promises are, but this is what I want you thinking about. Like, if we make a request from a server, how do I see that data? When does it come down? The most important thing is where you print that data is different than when you're working with regular synchronous values. So this is where things get different. So I'm going to write up my Axios request. Make that a little bigger. And the way you get the value out of a promise, so right here, this is the promise value, or this returns a promise. That is what is a promise, and I know that because in the docs, you'll see .then attached to it. So .then over here is chaining off of that request. So Axios.get is requesting the data from the server endpoint, and the .then is saying, hey, when you get this data back, then come and give me that data. And the way I'm going to get it is inside of this function. So here's where we get the results from server. Okay. So, and in fact, it's a good idea to just console log our data to just get an idea of what shape it's in. Okay, so this right here is basically the shortest version. So all the words and all this confusion and metaphors that come around promises and trying to give you this theoretical idea of eventual values or potential like state machines. Like, there's so much jargon and stuff used to describe it that is just this impenetrable nonsense. I mean, it's relevant only when you need it, but here, this is how you get data from a server. Here's how you get the data out of a promise. You write a .then. That's the most important thing. Errors are next most important. We'll get there though. But here is what our request is doing, and let's see it in action. So here's our response. We can actually see the data comes down from the server, and it actually gets put inside a key here called data. And data has a key itself called messages. But you know, here are images. So we can see this is server data coming down. We didn't put this into our page. This is all coming from a third party. And we can explore that by manually searching right here, or by manually trying in the browser that URL. Yeah, Faye, I think there's a lot of confusion around promises. And what I want to do is show you the utility around The why, well, hold up, let me look up, let me get our question thread going. I want to pull them up before we go on to our, take a break, because this stuff does get a little crazy. I want to see where you're at. There's our thread. Okay. So how do promises and components relate? They seem like totally different things. They are totally different things, but they do relate. You can use a component is just the idea is it's an enclosed, reproducible bit of code that does a thing. So that thing may be, hey, I need to list the Huskies on Dogs API. Okay, well, that component now, it has JavaScript, HTML, and CSS inside of it, but in fact, every time you render it or every time you use it, it may become different. Maybe the server data comes down in a different order. So everyone viewing that component may see something different, but they're using the same code, which is kind of crazy to think about. But they are different but related, very much so. And okay, so I will work to slow this down a bit. And this may be one of those lectures where you need to go through again because promises and async code are just such a brain melt. And I want to make sure that I annotate the code in the code pen so you can kind of see where the action is. It's easier to observe promises and understand them by playing around with them. So I really appreciate this. Excellent. So let me, okay, some of these things are really great. I'm going to come back to them later. Oh, sorry, if I asked something and didn't get a quick answer to it, let me know or reply in here. Let me know what that was. So what I want to show you here is really that promises a lot of ink gets spilled on the confusion around them and what they are. When you see when someone says it's an eventual value, what they're telling you is there's a difference how you print a promise. If it's eventual, that's a code for, hey, if I write this as, some more space here. So if this is making a server request, you may be tempted to think, hey, I can just say console.log promise. Okay. Well, what's that going to do? Or the only thing that's going to do is just show me this weird log data that says promise and resolved and give me some weird square bracket values. So that doesn't actually show me what the data was. It'll always look like this. So the way you need to, so what this is proving is that you can't just say promise.data or look at the data in any way that you're used to using. So if you can't just console log the results of a promise, here's where it's importantly different. Whenever you want to see the value, you add a .then and put a function in there that accepts one argument or one parameter, and then you console log inside here. So let me comment this out with a red X emoji. Okay, there we go. So reading the value out of a promise. Use .then. So if you want to distill it down and keep it simple, you don't just read the value out of a promise by the usual means you're used to. If you've got this variable, you don't just say console log promise, you need to look inside it by setting up a function handler with then. This is kind of like an event handler. This is kind of like, but it doesn't have a click or on or hover or drag or drop, any of that stuff. It is just it either succeeds or it fails. One or the other. So it's kind of like an event handler for that. So if a .then is for success, does anyone know how you handle failure? You guys are too quick on me here. .catch, exactly. So if we have two ways of handling this, that means the error version of this, or the catch handler, works the same. You still do a variable name, and then inside here, you can see if it actually worked or not. So I'll say console.log, error, and say, here's the error value. So every time you see a promise, there's only two ways that it can actually execute, or there's only two outcomes, success or failure. That's the bottom line with promises. So that really, all the stuff that is all theoretical and metaphors, they can confuse the matter. So here's how you see the value on success. Here's how you see the value on failure. Handles failure. And this handles success. Okay, so all of these ideas about what promises are, or all these like weird jargony phrases about promises are, I think they get in the way. When someone says promise, I want you to think, okay, I don't just console log that directly. I have to use .then and make another function that'll get the value, and then I can work with it. So let's go and, well, before we move on, let's do something here. I want to get another thread going, and I want everyone to answer this before we move on. And I don't want anyone to submit the answer before I say go. So the question is, what is a promise in your own words? So check that question in Slack. I want everyone to answer that in the thread, but don't send your answer in yet. Okay? So I'll give you a sec. Just think about it. What were we doing when it may be a really complicated way to read a value? It may be a more elaborate way, for sure. I'll give you another minute, and then I'll say it. Several people are typing. Yeah, let's break Slack's activity tracker or typing indicator. It's okay. I haven't given you the full explanation. I want to see where we're at. This is I'm taking the temperature. Okay, go ahead, submit your answers. Awesome. Excellent. Exactly. Promises data that are not usable yet because it's still wrapped up in an item that needs to be unwrapped using .then. completion or failure of async code and returning a result. Exactly, these are uh, great descriptions. And really, this, I think, goes to show that it helps to have your own mental model of this. Like as many blogs as you read, as many examples as you read, it helps to really crystallize in your brain by exploring it and playing with promises, playing with server requests, seeing what it's like to get that data down from a server. So I will do a, let's see some others in here. I love seeing this. There's a great variety of answers. That's fantastic. Yeah, code saying, I'll get to it later. And if it doesn't or it fails, yeah, it might blow up there. That's where our catch is for. Yeah, container for a future value. It passes the value to different functions that show the result of success or failure. These are fantastic answers. It is a wonky, featureful alternative to near direct callback functions. Featureful is my own word. Hey, developers, we invent words all the time. That's fantastic. So what you're seeing is like, if you're confused now and you were confused, if you were confused before and you wrote these answers, reflect on the fact that these words here on the right may not have made sense to you yesterday or the day before. It's a hard thing to describe. Adrian, a glorified if-else statement. Thanks for distilling that down. It's not quite, it's a binary state thing, but I get where you're going. I really appreciate trying to drill down there. So in Shelby, it represents the potential success or failure. But exactly, so like it promises to give you the information. Excellent. Fantastic answers. So, and if you're not sure, scan up and read some of your classmates' answers here. There is part of it is confusing, but it's because this is a weird abstraction that I think is easier to learn when you're actually working with the examples here. Because if we're already using a promise and we're doing this GET request thing to get the value, then printing the data out requires just writing this handler here or an error handler. Again, I think the example of it's kind of like an error event listener, but the way you write it is instead of like a click handler and then a drag handler, you are listening for, you use .then and you put the function in directly there, and then you use .catch and you put in a function. So no string label, you just use these named methods to get the value out. Okay, so let's, I think we're a little past break here. Let's go ahead and let me put 5 minutes on the clock. Let all this stuff percolate over your brain. Think about it a sec. When we come back, we'll dive into some more Slido questions and get into the wrapping up the guided project or continuing the guided project. Okay, let's get back to it here. And by the way, there's some great articles you're sharing in the channel. And I find that you can read a ton about promises and still have no idea what they are. The key thing is when you see a promise or you see some docs that say there's a promise involved, I want you to think, I need a dot then and a dot catch. This is how you handle success and failure off that value. You can almost read it literally like your code is making a promise to you that it's going to request this server or it's going to request this data from the server. And if it works and they keep their promise, you'll get your data in dot then. And for dot catch, well, maybe it should be dot lies because they lied and something broke and the promise is broken. So really that at a high level is 80% of what promises are. So there's more to it, but for right now, if your mental model is, I've made a promise request or I've got some API like Axios that returns a promise, aha, I need to use dot then to get that data. So these console logs, like this is basically, I wrote code that looked like this for probably a year before I was comfortable just writing, like I almost copy pasted a dot then with a console log and a dot catch with a console log with error in there. Like instinctively, reflexively, it was just automatic because I wanted to see what was happening in my promise value. And this, I learned, is the way to see what's happening inside there or see what happens when the server either responds with success or failure. So it's kind of crazy to think about that a API that has only two outcomes, success or failure, has so much written about it and so much confusion. But really, that's what I want you to focus on and distill this down to is the value. You're either going to get this result or it's going to fail. And it can fail because we give a bad URL in there. And we can see hey, here's my error in all capitals. Request failed with status code 403. So it's actually returning an error because I didn't put the HTTPS in there. And I put that back. 200 response, we get the data, everything's good. So we can see that there's either or. There's no middle ground. It is, here's our success handler, here's fail. Okay? So let's start by taking the first record of this data and just putting it on the page. And then we'll start to work out a more fleshed out component. But let's see if you have any. Let me pull up our questions here. Sorry, before I get too into it there. So will async gonna revise Sprint tomorrow? I believe so, but don't hold me to that yet. And we will. I'll post some updates and communication on that later today. So let me start that. Thank you for that. This is something I've written about. There's an article on my site about it. You can read about that later. Pros and cons are outside of scope of this lecture, though. So this is a little out of scope, Jocelyn, but correct. Function hoisting works different than other variables. Is new promise a built-in? Yes, it is. Promise is native to the language and has been added basically in every part of it, from browsers to Node.js for many years now, or for several years now. So talk to your TL about that. So it would be very helpful if you would repeat the definitions or restate them. So yes, when I give you a definition for promises, I can say it's an eventual value or a container or representation of either success or failure, where you can only see those with functions. Now, that only makes sense. Those are just a bunch of words that, unless you've seen the code along with that, it can be really hard to make sense of that. So that's part of why I wanted you to put it in your own words, what a promise is, because it's more helpful if you've got your own concrete definition, and if you still can't, it helps to see your classmates and how they're adopting and internalizing this information, because they're really close to learning this and building that mental model up. To see how they're building that up is really helpful for your own learning and for your own mental model. I think so. What are promises? I think we've covered that. I think we've. So this is I think we're getting some questions that are edge cases here. So this question here is a good idea, but I want to focus on the objectives today and what you're going to need for the project. Can you give an example? The question is, can you give an example of using promises to return data without using Axios? Yes, I can provide links to those, or I think the articles that have been provided in the channel are great, provide plenty of examples of that. And I've got blog articles I can share. There's plenty of resources, but I think they're a little out of scope for today's lecture. Stop being so jumpy, Slido. So this is a good question here. Why do you need to see the value on failure? Wouldn't you already know if success doesn't work? Not quite. So let's go and look here. So because there's no already know it failed, you want to be intentional with understanding if something's a fail, because what could happen is the server could fail and silently you don't see anything. If there's no catch handler, this isn't as big of an issue anymore, but it used to be a big problem where if you didn't have a catch handler, you didn't know there was an error. Like, it just wouldn't say anything. And your console wouldn't say anything. You just wouldn't know that there were failures happening. And it was extremely frustrating to debug when you just didn't know where the problem was. There's the JavaScript ecosystem is a lot better today, where if you forget this, you'll see a different kind of error. But being intentional here lets you actually write custom messages, like saying, the dogs API is currently down. Try again later. So this is really a place to provide a user-friendly message. Let me actually go and show you. Let's break our URL here by removing our HTTPS. Scroll to the bottom here. So now you can see the dogs API is currently down. Please try again later. So the idea is you can make your code intentionally tell you what's going on. So when you have hundreds or thousands of lines of code, you know exactly where to go. Like, error handling is kind of an art, but the important thing is just handling it's a good idea. Assuming it's always going to succeed is not the greatest idea. So right here, let's go and see. My Slack popped up a big message and went away. Okay, I'll ignore that for now. Let me know in questions if there's any other, or let me know in Slido if you've got any other questions on this. But after this lesson, we'll share out more links and resources and channel so that you can read more and really dive deep on promises. So let's keep building, and we will now, let's pivot to the component piece. So if we need to show cards on the page, let's look at our CSS and our HTML and note that first, let me just show you our HTML again. Like you may be surprised to see, there's almost nothing there. We just have entry, and that's where we're going to show our data. But let's go and look at some of the content down here. So we have some CSS already set up for us. We have a dog card and a dog image class. Okay, so I think those are the two key pieces that we need. They're going to look like probably div with a class equals dog card and a image with the dog image. So I know we probably haven't sealed everything up on promises, but let's focus on this for a sec, and we'll stitch them up together, and then I'll re-ask you about promises. So let's move down here into, just going to comment this out for a second so I don't hammer away at the dogs API every keystroke I make. I don't want to get blocked, or sometimes APIs will be like, why are you making a request every second? Stop, and they may actually block you. So I don't want that to happen live in the lecture, so that's why I commented that out. Let's go and make a dog card function. And the card is just going to take an image URL and a breed. So what did we do yesterday? We went and used document.createElement to create the elements. So here we've got a div. Let me go and duplicate that. Okay, so now we've got a div and an image, and I want to make sure they have the right content and classes. So some comments in here, create the elements, set the styles, and then we want to append them or put them together. So put together. Okay, so setting the styles, we're going to use class list. Let me close my console there. So class list.add, again, very similar to yesterday. And our class is going to be dog card. And for the image, it's just dog image. Okay, so what do we use to put together DOM nodes? What did we use yesterday? Let me get a thread going. Slack, type in the right. What's that about breaking the code pen? Oh, yeah, if it makes too many HTTP requests. Pen child. Yeah, how do we put these together is the question. So, excellent. Excellent. Code pen, don't mess with me. Okay. So card.append child. Excellent. So now I've got this create dog card, and we've put these classes on, and now we've put these two elements back together. So we need to return card. So let me put in here. Okay, so here is our create dog card method or function here. Okay, just want to leave it up on screen for a sec if you're typing along. So again, before we integrate this into the promise, let me use this before we even get there. Let's copy a URL in here. So I'm manually going to take this data and I'm manually going to put it in here. So you can see, I'm just testing to see if this is actually going to work. And on the const, I've got a variable called terrier, and it's still not on the page or anything. Nothing's changed on the right. We still need to append it to the actual content in our page. So let's look at our HTML here. So if entry is the piece that is the target that we're trying to put our content into, you may recognize this if you've looked at some React code. A lot of React apps basically look like this. They don't have any HTML to them. They start with something called a root element, and then you attach your whole front-end framework attaches to one DOM node, and everything from there is all in the React library. So this is kind of a good lead into that, where we only have this one div, and it's kind of our anchor point to where all the other content is going to be filled in. So, but first, to get there, we need to query selector to find that element so that we can even append our terrier variable here. So let's first go and say const entry equals query selector. So now entry is going to be our entry is a variable now that we can use to append child. And we put in terrier in there. Can we save that? Okay, so I see a box. How do I make the image show up? So what is missing in this create dog card? So here's the image being created. Here's the class list. Landry, bingo. Tell me exactly. Or not a style.source, it's an image.source. So let's go put that in there. So the step we missed was set the content. So that means this is where we're taking our parameters and putting them in here. So and then the breed is going to be, let's see if there was a class for that. So I just have dog card, selected an image. Okay, so there's no breed title here. So let's add another element. So const, let's say title, and document dot create element. Let's make this like an H2 or H3. And the reason is it's not the header of the page, like look at all these dogs, or click to select your favorite dogs. So this title here is where I want to put the breed. So text content equals read, and there we go. So the other pieces, we need to still put the card.append child and title. So let's see if that came through. There we go. Breed terrier. Look at that cute dog. Okay, so here is proof that we can make one thing show up on the page. And sure, we did it manually. And if you can imagine, this is going to be really a lot of work if you manually have to go in and query the API and put in these URLs, copy paste them over. That should seem pretty ridiculous because it's not what we are aiming to do. We're just testing and proving that this thing works. Okay, so now that I know that my component is putting together everything right, this is where we can now take the working code that puts everything on the DOM and see if we can make the data, if we can mesh the data together using a for each inside our promise handler. So let's go and let me move this entry reference up to the top here. And I'm going to comment the terrier thing out here just as a example and comment that as a manual test before wiring in the async or get request. Okay, so let me undo or uncomment out all my Axios code here. Get some more space. Okay, so we've kind of seen a little bit about what a promise looks like when you're using it. Okay, so let's, again, when we're trying to access the data from the server endpoint, we want to see this data here in this message key, message with an array of 1,000 things. By the way, this may be what it looks like for you. If you don't, like I'm using a JSON viewer plugin or a Chrome extension, by the way. So if you're following along and you're pulling up the images view and it looks like this, it's normal. This is what it should look like. The extension I'm using, you can check in the Chrome store, and I think it's one of the top JSON viewers. So pretty prints it like this, and we can see that there are 1,000 messages here. Okay, so this is an array. We just need to go through the array and return a card for every single one in here. And that may be a lot. There's going to be 1,000 rendered dogs. So let's go back to our project here. Get my emoji in there. This is the way to do it. Excellent. Thanks, Sean, for sharing that in channel. So here, this is what we want to look at. Let me open my console again. So what this is telling me is we get our server response. See the word response right there. The object comes down, and we've got a data key. You see message 1,000. This is the same shape data we have over here. Okay, this is the important piece to notice. The data coming down is accessible via the data key and then the message key. So how do you see that? So data.data might be a little weird at first, but that is the key that the data comes down on. So here we can see we're now a layer deeper, and all we get now is a message object. So let's add that with .message. So one by one, you can make sure you're getting to the right part of the response. And here we see it spill out all of the URLs. Response, 1,000 of these, American Terriers. Awesome. Okay, so this is now an array. This is now an earthy data type. It's not some abstract eventual value now that we're here. So let me give this a variable name, so const images, and I'm going to use plural word name because even though message came down singular, I like the convention of using pluralized names to describe things that are arrays. So images dot for each. So images.forEach works just like every array method. It takes a function. So again, we're back to using some prior, using the things we've already learned. Close my console. And all we need to do in here, this is where it's going to look similar to our prior work, where we do a for each and create new DOM nodes based on that, or new classes. Let me show you how this looks. So image URL. And what I want to do is say, not new, so create dog card. And what do I need to do here to make this work? If this is giving me an element, why isn't this showing up? Like, or how can I understand this better? Let me get a thread going. Give me some ideas on this, because I want to see where you're at. If you were to console log, where would you console log? I'll put the question in here. Okay, let me swap that up here. Yep, never appended it, exactly. So, good spotting, Scott. That was the next thing. Exactly. Let me see. So this message bit, the reason I figured out like to put data.data.message is by printing first just data. I make no assumptions that anything's there. And importantly, you want to take apart the object that's coming down in your console. You want to see it for real. Like, I don't even trust the documentation that many APIs give me. Like, if they tell me that I'm going to get a result like this that says message, that is true in this case, but I don't even like to take that for granted. I want to see it in my console. And in this case, Axios gives us a key of data to access it. So Axios is adding a little bit of a layer in there. And that's where data comes in. And the message is coming from the API here. So let's go and append this thing. So I have my entry. So I'm going to take entry.append child from our little manual test that had nothing async about it, but it worked. I'm going to put that in here. Oh, shit. So here is, it just occurred to me that having like 200 of you follow along and hit 1,000 images on their server at once. might not be, we might distribute a denial of service there, a service. But let's see how we get along here. Aw, cute doggos. Sorry, cat. Okay, so we're now getting data down, but as Scott mentioned, there is a thing missing here, our breed. So we could just copy terrier in here and say, create dog car terrier. Save that. Let's see if it comes down. Maybe we broke their system. The API is currently down. Maybe we did denial of service then. Yeah, 1,000 images is a lot. Like having 200 people hit 10 images would be a lot, but let's see. So there is actually sometimes they have a limit option in here. Or, hey, we get random ones and limit that. Let's try that URL. So random 3. So when you're using, the reason we want to always think about the failure is, well, because it can happen. And you want to be intentional about that. As you can see, this wasn't intentional. I didn't mean to take down their service. But hopefully, if we just do, I wonder if I just add a /3 to the end here. Okay, so the random one works. Then save that, so you can refresh yours if you want to grab the updated version. And while this is, let's see here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we've only got 3 things coming down. I'm sure their server admin would appreciate that. So let's take a look at this terrier value. These aren't terriers anymore. We're dealing with hounds. What? Okay, so what you can do here is actually build this URL dynamically. So let's turn this into a template literal, and we're going to inject a breed in there. Okay, so watch where I'm putting this variable in here. So I'm replacing out the breed with a variable for it. Or not that, breed. Okay, so that's taking this variable from line 4 and putting it into the URL that's being requested on line 5 here. Okay, so go ahead, put your favorite dog breed in there. If it's not working, you can make sure to check over on the documentation here, their list of breeds. One of these strings will work. And what I've learned doing this is apparently I can only spell like 10% of breed names. So let's keep going here. Oh, we're coming up on our break here. Let's finish up putting the correct breed name over here, and then we'll take our break. So instead of hard coding terrier in here, the reason we put this variable in there is now that we can reuse it down below when we're rendering out the cards. So breed up here, and then breed down here, they're being shared. So hound, hound, hound. Awesome. Oh, Afghans. Okay, so let's take a quick 5-minute break, upvote those questions on Slido, and I will see you in a Type 5. Okay, let's get back to the lesson here. We got a questions thread up here. So Jared's asking, I still don't understand the importance or use of Axios. More on that would be appreciated. So I know, so that was a little earlier in the lecture, but just real quick, Axios is just a popular way to access a third-party service, and there are other ways to do it. If you're still unclear on that, we can message me in the channel or DM me, and I can share some resources that explore alternate patterns, and that's the best way, if slower, to understand that. But again, there's no like one right answer. It's not the only way to do it. So, and again, on this one, that gets into some really fancy trivia on the JavaScript runtime. Super interesting stuff, but wait, a little bit out of scope. Two functions of the same set timeout, which goes first? You can't know for sure if they have the exact same set timeout for reasons. So I did answer several of these while you were on break here and marked them as answered. So check the reply in here. And if you've got any, I see some of these I've answered in the lecture. I think we explored why we do the data.data.message. And part of that was peeling back the shape of the object via console log. So let's go and let's move back to our lesson here. And I'll leave those answered questions there so you can see the replies. Just to be clear, yeah, check those replies and also TLs, feel free to reply or add anything I missed there. Okay, so we have our dogs here. We've got our API request. And we are going through and creating cards for each of the dogs. This is basically doing all the things we need. And let's go back and explore our objectives, see how they square with what we've built. Jump to the top here. So understand and utilize asynchronous JavaScript and promises. So we maybe emphasize the utilize piece. The understand will come naturally with use. And once you use a little bit, read some of those articles that have been shared. Re-watch the video. Re-watch some of these things. Will get that aha moment when you see it come down, or when you see this these server requests, like this result from this endpoint here doesn't look any good in my browser. We want to make sure we use a library like Axios or Fetch or whatever to get this data so that I can dynamically use it and render it on the page. So promises are one of the ways we do that. Our next objective was understand HTTP requests and get data from a server using Axios. So HTTP requests, again, are everything you do in a browser. When I see that URL, learn.lambdaschool.com, this whole thing here, if I hit enter, that makes a server request. And I want to use Axios, or we used Axios, to request that data programmatically. So it didn't change the URL in the browser. It's doing this behind the scenes, and we can actually see that happening. When we go down here, we can see our data is available, and now our message array only has 3 items, 2 Afghans and an English hound. And because it's random, everyone's probably seeing different stuff. And let's try to refresh that. We got some bloodhounds and some English hounds in this request. So the reason to use a component, the reason to use async requests or Axios is Well, we don't know what data we're going to get down. We don't know what the service is going to present to us. But in the case that it succeeds, we want to take this array of 3 items, or however many, and render them to the page. So .then is the place we get that data from the server, and now we can work with it as though it is synchronous, because it now is. It's no longer, we can switch thinking about async and did it succeed or did it fail, because when you're in your .then, you can just assume this is the code to handle success. And this is going to look, this code from line 13 down to 19, this should look very similar to the stuff we did yesterday where we had an inline data object. Like some of you were asking me, is it normal or common to have a JSON object right in your JavaScript files? And sometimes it is, common to have hard-coded values there that get rendered. This is an alternate way. Sometimes your data comes from another server. This is taking that data down and pulling and putting it on the page inside this .then handler. And if it does fail, we print out to the log what happened. You may want a stretch goal might be to replace the title here or here to say, hey, an error happened, please try again. So, because the user wouldn't see the console down here, you would, but they'd just see a blank page. So think through some of your error handling, but the important thing is this builds on the knowledge from yesterday and some of the other DOM work we've done where we take an array of things, we for each them, and we create a new instance, and we append it to the child, or we append it to the document. Okay, let me leave that on screen here. Let's try stop scrolling fast for y'all. Okay, so let this percolate. Let me just scan some of the questions here. Okay. So so Axios is really for requesting data from third-party services. Like this is an API. I mentioned earlier there's a great list of APIs. Let me show you what that is, and then I'll share that link in the channel. Awesome APIs. Okay, so here's my cat API. Okay, so here's a list of things that you can leverage. So if you can make a request with Axios, you can do incredible stuff. Why you know about this is all of these are services that you can leverage, and there's job searches, there's business stuff you can do. You can access calendar services. If you want to integrate with Google Drive so that you can search for data you store there, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff that is really, really powerful. Like you don't have to know how to do trading with cryptocurrencies, but you can use an API that'll let you make those trades and kind of hide all that complexity that's going on behind the scenes. So this is a really interesting list. Let me share this in channel. Okay, so let's go and so yeah, definitely look at this on your own time. You will see things that may relate to your prior work, or if I know some of you come from like finance or sales, all kinds of different backgrounds. A lot of the time, there's data available. Like if you come from the public sector or from government, there's public APIs for government data, census data, all kinds of crazy stuff you can use to build incredible things, including dog APIs and cat APIs. So, and let me just preface that with not all the APIs available here have the best of documentation. They're not all up to date. Some of them, because they're free. A lot of them will kind of fall out of use. So if you find one that just hasn't been updated since 2008, maybe look at a different one. Just want to put that caveat on there. Okay, so let's go to, there we go. So first, let me just make sure I've got my comments in here. So the first thing is the main DOM node attach. Select the main DOM node to attach our dynamic content. Okay, and in this case, we know it's entry from here. No, cute doggos. So here is, and by the way, there was a question inside of in Slido on do you use const promise equals? In fact, I don't. I wouldn't use it. And what I do is let me comment this one out. Okay, there we go. Axios.get, and then immediately afterwards I change .then. So this may seem like a subtle change or a crazy change, but this value here used to be just a variable called promise. The reason to avoid that is you can get some weird, there's some weird gotcha question, weird gotchas around it. It's a little out of scope for the lesson, but I'll include that in Slack over lunch. And the why on this is kind of nuanced, but this is the habit I want you to get into. When you make a request, now if you can't use a semicolon here, by the way, if you try to, you will get an error. It'll say unexpected token dot. So when you're chaining your methods, make sure you don't put a semicolon on that line. And immediately after, you can do a dot then. And that's where your logic goes. Okay, let me save. Okay, so let me ask another question here in the thread. In your own words. Okay, check that out in WEB21 channel. And let me copy this last step over. I want to actually break that out, kind of like how I did yesterday with pulling apart the steps out of the objective. Let me show you how this stuff gets broken down. Slack is being dumb today. Okay, I thought it was just me, but it's being a little wonky. Okay, so if this is our objective here, iterate over a list of data received from the server. Here's a comment saying, kind of hinting that there's another step here. Okay, then creating a set of components, and the word and, we're going to put that on a new line too. Okay, so iterate over a list of data received from a server, create a set of components, adding them to the DOM. Okay, so iterate over a list of data from the server. we do that. Number these. Okay, so here is number these like this. Number 1. And create a set of components. Well, here's our create dog card component. That's step 2. And add them to the DOM. Well, here's a pen child. Here's our step 3. So that third objective is really the meat of this guided project. Let me look at some of those Slido questions that I answered via tech chat, because I just realized I answered some of them. And if you're looking at the video, this might get lost. Okay, we can check on that in a sec. So is it going to be common going forward to have very little HTML and dynamically loading the content into the index when loaded? Yes. So this is very, very common in front-end frameworks. If async means running code out of order, in the chronological order of code written, then does hoisting count as async? It is not hoisting and async are different things, and it is understandable that you could get them mixed up because the order of both of them seems to be related. So very interesting point though. The functions you can call them out of order, which may seem like what I was just talking about, but functions just get hoisted differently. And in your code pen, what is error string? What is response? They're just string labels. So it helps us understand the console better when there's a lot of data being printed. So especially when things are out of order, it really helps to have things labeled so that you can see them. So again, talking about is this word response, and that response down here lets us know what that is. So you can just say 3 random doggos. So now we see 3 random doggos. Ta-da! So it's about putting some more meaning into your console log so you can understand what things are, what you expect. I prefer so sometimes you'll see people write a comment like, got 3 random doggos. Well, instead of writing a comment that just presumes that's what's happening, I like to write out a console log that says that and then prints out the value so that I can kind of check myself. Instead of just saying a comment that might fall out of, that may get old and incorrect, it's a bit more helpful to get in the habit of just writing out the console log that says, hey, this is what I expect, and let's take a look at that value. Okay, let's see here. And here, this one is, I think I touched on this, but it's really important. Is it better to create a variable for the promise and then use promise.then, or to use axios.get and then chain your .then? I'd say definitely chain .then on there, and like I said, the reasons are a little nuanced. I will include some examples later for that. The reason why is the answers to those questions I used to use as trivia to trip up interview candidates when I was interviewing senior devs. Not the best strategy, but basically they worked 100% of the time. There was always surprises I could introduce there, and the gotchas are not important. It's more important to just get the right habit down and learn that way. So I think we covered that piece. Sorry for scrolling around a bunch. I'm trying to trying to balance keeping the code focused on screen, zoomed in enough, and leave it there so you can follow along. We have some people typing as they go along, some people writing notes. So so if you think I'm going too fast or too slow, mention what you're doing or tell me that, hey, I'm trying to keep notes, or hey, I'm trying to follow along, or I typed an error and I don't know where. Let me know what you're doing to follow along, and that'll help me kind of dial in the speed or what I'm emphasizing. So please keep that feedback coming. So some people are still very confused about this material, and that's fine. There is a lot of resources out there. Unfortunately, a lot of the ones I've been finding online are very, very complex, as I'm sure you may be finding as well. So I'm trying to find some entry or some beginner level materials that give you a different perspective on what we've been building. But I'm still trying to source that. I spent a good amount of time yesterday trying to find some third-party resources to give you another perspective. Probably a good 2 hours, and I feel your pain as a junior developer going into this material, trying to make sense of it, searching online. Some articles are good at the beginning, and then they just go off the rails in complexity. So okay, so I think some of these we've answered. And if you're asking like what exactly is HTTP, there's I think someone put in a JavaScript info reference that also includes a lot of great diagrams on web communication and what's really going on behind the scenes. But again, that could be a real deep rabbit hole. So it's really helpful to start using the thing, figuring out what's going on. And then once you've had experience playing with the promises, playing with Axios, and you can console log the success and failure, that's when I'd recommend looking at rereading some of the articles and blog posts that maybe didn't make sense before. Okay, so, and yeah, this one, are calling APIs the most common use case for promises? Pretty much, yeah. Excellent, excellent. And good point, Josh. So let's go through and I'm going to use Polly to get a poll going. So I'm writing a question in WEB21 right now. I want to ask, how comfortable? Oh, sorry, before I proceed, Amir, thank you for reminding me, really important. Let's look at our project today. So get user card. So today, this is a fresh GitHub repo. Unlike yesterday's where we reused our old components repo, this is a fresh project doing a completely different thing. And it's a really cool project. Here, you're going to be building a component that uses the GitHub API. And you are going to be building something that looks like this. So you can see a list of developers. And the question is, well, where does this data come from? These aren't dogs. Okay, they're instructors. But the key things here are you're going to use Axios again, and we're going to use our Axios or our GitHub API, which the URL is somewhere here. Let me look at the JavaScript file in here. I think it's in here. Yeah, there we go. So let's take a look at the data that comes from GitHub's API and compare it to where we're going with this image here. So let me split screen this for you. So here's my account. It's on the side. Okay, so you can go ahead and try this right now. If you put in api.github.com/users/ and your GitHub name, you'll see what their API returns and tells you about you. You may discover that you need to put in a blog URL or a bio, which apparently some of the other instructors here need to do, Brian. So you can see here, bio is null, but bio here is CS instructor at Lambda School for Dan. So that's where the stuff comes from. And so if we put in Teton Dan, we should see that data come through just like we see on the left here. Apparently, Dan realized he's not a CS instructor at Lambda School anymore. He got a promotion a while ago. So he updated it and put in program manager, which is so, but you can see the rest of the data, the location, name, login, all that stuff comes through. So use this as an opportunity to update your profile on GitHub. But the task is you want to use this URL to render out cards on a page. And you're going to build on the technique we looked at where you're creating image elements. You're going to use this avatar URL. And you can see where the stuff is coming from, okay? So this is the file you're going to be working in, this GitHub card/index.js, and it's got some steps broken out for you. So, Dan was kind enough to include the front-end team's GitHub handles. There's a couple that you should add in there. But go ahead and make sure you can get some handles from your classmates. You can share it and render, create a renderer that shows everyone's stuff. The Windows back. That renders like this. If you want, there's stretch goals. You can change the CSS. And let me show you where those are. So these are advanced. If you can get to any one of these, if you can, especially this first one, this is really hard. If you get this, that is a hardcore mode for sure. And definitely, if you need to, just remember, if you need to make sense of what's going on, console log your way through each step of this process. Async code is really hard to make sense of in a mental model unless you are constantly console logging, and make sure you're also putting in useful string labels like I showed you here. So 3 random doggos. Please don't say 3 random doggos when you're rendering our 3 instructors here. They may take it personally, but be specific on what you expect. And that way, when you're teasing apart the log in your console, hopefully it'll make sense and it'll square up. And if it doesn't, figure out why. Okay, so we are, so again, today's project, you can just go ahead and fork or clone, and just like usual, just like normal. There's nothing crazy about this one. And I think that's the key points I wanted to cover. Amir, am I forgetting anything else? Okay, I think I'm good here. Or I think we're good. I think we've covered most of the stuff. And again, if you are having trouble figuring out promises and just keep reading about it, you're probably going to feel like you're getting further and further away from understanding. That is normal. Everyone experiences that. Try get closer to hands on keyboard and getting that data, getting that faster. So first focus on getting an applied mental model, and then you can kind of extract and basically talk like Let me show up my thread here. So in your own words, what is a promise? Oh, beautiful. Y'all are sounding like developers. This is great. A very confusing headache, but also a placeholder for data. Fair enough, yeah. That's that. You're not wrong. Exactly. So as much as I can tell you what it is, the most important thing is getting your own definition. Get what it means to you, write it down, build that experience and get some reps on it. Oh, Amir, thank you. Okay, so I think we're at lunch. Let's make sure we all take a break, let the stuff percolate, and really get some reps on it. And I will see y'all next week. This has been a fun one. Thank you for your feedback again. Keep it coming. I'll see y'all later.